A drug once identified with the seediest parts of the inner city has invaded the most affluent suburbs.
It's not hard to find. It's out there everywhere.
An old enemy launching a new attack on our children.
We're finding that this is showing up in high schools with frightening frequency.
Families are losing the battle.
I tell him, Andrew, it's going to be jail or body bag.
Officials watching bodies stack up.
If you are dealing in heroin, you are dealing in death.
I'm Megan Lynch, and this is Heroin, Killing a New Generation.
I had my life together, and then it turned into this nightmare.
Right now, about 80% of our clients are heroin addicts.
It's cheaper for kids to get a heroin high than it is to go to the movies.
Kids don't realize how dangerous even taking heroin even once can be.
If somebody said to us, Andrew's going to die of heroin, we'd say, no way. No way.
Morgues are filling up with heroin's victims. In St. Louis County, overdose deaths are on pace to double last year's numbers. Across the river, the Madison County, Illinois coroner has 4 times the cases of just 2 years ago. Those figures don't include the people who overdosed and survived. It has officials throughout the St. Louis region sounding an alarm.
We want parents to know. We want teachers and schools to know. This is in your community already.
The people who work with addicts have been watching it build. They're scared.
What we're seeing right now is an epidemic.
Dan Duncan, Director of Community Services for the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse in St. Louis.
I have worked in this field now for 26 years. I've seen a lot of drug trends come and go, and I would say this is the worst, most dangerous, most concerning drug trend I've ever seen.
Duncan's agency used to get a handful of calls about heroin.
Good afternoon, National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse.
Now the phone is ringing off the hook. More than half the people on the other end trying to get out of heroin's grip. He tells KMOX he's terrified.
You can look at all the different drugs that are out there that people might use to get high, and it's the drug by far, more than any other drug that I can think of, that will destroy lives and take lives.
Forget the image of the strung-out, dirty junkie shooting up in an alley.
Historically, that would have been the profile of your typical heroin user, a lower socioeconomic, urban individual, down and out, etc. Not anymore. That profile is changing.
Today's heroin addicts are straight-A students, football players, cheerleaders, young professionals. Why are they getting hooked? Because they're already doped up on pain pills. Sergeant Karen Gordon oversees the Metropolitan Enforcement Group of Southwestern Illinois.
A lot of the people that we've been arresting have said, yeah, we started out with pills and then we moved to heroin.
It took the most sophisticated organizations in the world to cash in on the appetite for painkillers, Mexican drug cartels.
They make marketing choices.
That's right, drug cartels marketing to our youth. Harry Summers, Special Agent in Charge, DEA, St. Louis.
And they recognized that we had a rather large population in the United States that was using this drug. And they targeted that group in a way to expand their heroin market.
The strategy's brilliant. First, the cartels gave heroin a boost. Summers says in the past, heroin wasn't very pure.
And they really were putting in 1, 2, 3, maybe as much as 10% heroin into their veins.
Now, heroin is incredibly potent.
Even on very user-level street buys, we see 50%. And at a wholesale level, maybe 70% or so.
What's that mean for the user? Sergeant Karen Gordon.
They took the needle out of it. You could snort it, you can eat it, you can smoke it, and you wouldn't have to inject it.
You can even put it under your skin. It's called a skin pop. Plus, the cartels put it in a form that looks just like other drugs kids are stealing from medicine cabinets.
The gelatin capsules, those are called buttons.
The final nail in the coffin, the drug lords made it cheap. The DEA's Harry Summers.
You can buy a hit of heroin as cheap as $10.
That puts a high within reach of most kids. Now you know what's out there. If you think it's not in your neighborhood, think again.
We don't have to single anyone out because it's everywhere.
That's next time on Heroin, Killing a New Generation. Megan Lynch, Newsradio 1120 KMOX. Matt got hooked on heroin in high school. He and his friends snorted it. The idea of shooting up, unthinkable.
We made a pact to, beat up whoever used the needle.
Soon, this middle-class kid from South St. Louis wanted more. He turned from his friends to the needle. He shot up.
Once I hit that line, there was no going back. I couldn't stop myself. not even for a day.
Matt was able to hide it from his parents until his first OD.
And next thing I knew, there was firefighters standing over me, and I had a IV in my arm with a horrible cold feeling inside.
It still wasn't enough to scare him straight.
It's not like a chocolate cake craving. It's an animalistic urge to survive.
As Matt entered adulthood, his plans for the future forgotten. His addiction consumed him.
I was taking people's debit cards, going to the bank. I was going through purses of family members. I was going through my son's piggy bank.
After 6 lost years, 6 tries at rehab, 3 overdoses, Matt's desperate to save his life and regain a future. Stories like this have the people behind the scenes openly urging families and educators to wake up.
We can't bury our head in the sand and act as if heroin isn't in the high schools because we live in a good school district.
The U.S. Attorney from the Southern District of Illinois, Stephen Wigginton. Madison County, Illinois State's Attorney, Tom Gibbons.
We're finding that this is showing up in high schools in an unbelievable amount, with frightening frequency.
Again, the same message from St. Louis County Police Chief Tim Fitch.
We know that the heroin problem is in the high schools. We know that. I will also tell you that there are some high schools that are in denial about it.
Fitch wouldn't reveal which schools. KMOX News did learn of at least one that's been holding parent seminars about the heroin crisis, but when we tried to get that high school to talk to us, their public relations person told us they didn't want the school's name associated with the word heroin. Other schools failed to return our calls, and yet another told KMOX they'd had enough bad press and didn't want to be tied to the issue. Whether or not districts come clean, experts say they're certain many classrooms have been touched by heroin.
Probably a lot of people from St. Louis would be surprised when they would hear some of the high schools I would mention where we're seeing the kids here. We're assessing kids coming from some of our better high schools.
Dan Duncan with the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse says some teens are trying heroin before they take driver's ed.
Well, we got one call recently from about a 14-year-old girl who was on heroin already.
Dr. Stephen Huss, head of Jefferson County's ComTree, a treatment center, sees clients that young, kids with everything going for them.
A cheerleader was making A's and B's, never anything below a B, was one of the more popular kids in school, and became a drug addict.
Huss believes many of these kids get started at so-called farm parties. That's PHARM. They pop pills, Prozac, Xanax, oxycodone, stolen from relatives' pill bottles and purses. So when they're offered a button of heroin, it's no big thing. Getting more, far too easy.
A 14 or 15-year-old kid can go riding with somebody who has the ability to drive, a 16-year-old, and drive 30 minutes from Jefferson County and get pretty well what they want.
Where do they find it? Dimitri's neighborhood.
Oh, it was, on every street corner.
Dimitri is from North St. Louis, an area saturated with smack.
Every major intersection, gas station you go to is there. They got it.
As a teen, he was able to avoid it.
I had family members at the time that was using it, and I had never experienced it before, but, I seen what they was going through. I wasn't going through that.
But he couldn't hold out. Dope took over 7 years of his life.
And my wife was looking at me, and she had tears in her eyes. And I caused that hurt. I caused that pain.
Dimitri's been clean since last July. It's a daily battle.
It's a terrible task to try to exclude yourself from it because it's everywhere. Every corner you turn, every block you go down.
It's so easy to score in North St. Louis and North St. Louis County. Addicts are willing to travel miles to get their fix.
We see them driving in from Bowling Green, Wentzville, Jefferson County. So most of the users, I would say, are suburban users.
St. Louis County Police Chief Tim Fitch. Over and over, KMOX News was told heroin is reaching every corner of the St. Louis region, virtually every zip code. It's the same in Illinois.
We're buying from Fairview Heights, Granite City, Cahokia. But most of the people that we're buying from are users also.
Illinois State Police Sergeant Karen Gordon.
We see people from farther out communities to the east that are coming over to East St. Louis to buy it.
The coroner's seen overdose deaths in many of the towns already mentioned, plus O'Fallon, Collinsville, Troy.
We don't have to single anyone out because it's everywhere.
What's needed most is nowhere near as widespread.
We have huge waiting lists.
Finding help is as hard as staying clean.
People don't want to go back to treatment because they don't want to admit that they messed up.
More in our next report on heroin killing a new generation. Megan Lynch, Newsradio 1120 KMOX.
That's the worst part about it, is people don't want to go back to treatment because they don't want to admit that they messed up.
Sarah sobs, coming to grips with 5 years of heroin abuse.
It took away so many of the most important things that I cared about and that it meant something to me and I had worked so hard for. I lost all that.
She lost a career. Sarah's a registered nurse. If she can't go back now, it would put her too close to drugs. The addiction also strained her relationship with her parents.
They used to be so proud of me, and I was, between me and my brother, I was always the straight A student and everything, and I had my life together, and then it turned into this nightmare.
She tried rehab more than once. Her habit still spiraled out of control. At the end, Sarah was spending up to $200 a day, more than nurses' wages could support.
Part of the reason that my parents still have a hard time trusting me is I had stolen my mom's jewelry, and I pawned it.
Heroin took something else, her boyfriend. Also battling heroin addiction, he died of an overdose.
He was my best friend, I could tell him anything, and he would do anything for me. And he just...
At the time, Sarah was in her latest treatment program, had 45 days clean. Her parents were terrified to tell her he was gone.
And they were so worried that I was going to start using again. I told them everything was going to be okay, and the first thing I did is called an old friend and went used.
She's determined it was the last time. Sarah's celebrating 6 months clean. She's facing tough odds.
There's a saying in counseling fields, you don't see many old heroin addicts. That's because they're dead.
Dr. Stephen Huss with treatment agency Comtree isn't being flip. Addicts can break free, but it takes a monumental effort. First, there's withdrawal. Without medical help, Huss describes it as being like the flu times 10, crippling, excruciating.
Your body trembles, you sweat, your breathing changes, your heart rate changes, your whole body feels as if it is tingling with pain.
That torment often drives the junkie to use again.
At a point, they get past the concept of, I'm going to take heroin to get high. They eventually get to the point where I need to take heroin to stay normal.
It's not that addicts don't try to get help. Many have been in treatment over and over and over. At Assisted Recovery Centers of America, the bulk of the heroin clients have tried at least one program. Clinical Director Ned Presnall.
We have many people who have been to 12, 13, 14 treatments.
He and other treatment experts have this piece of advice for the addict.
If I don't treat it as a chronic illness for the rest of my life, I have very low likelihood of surviving it.
But Presnall says insurance coverage for therapy can be limited. For example, his agency uses special medication to help addicts manage cravings.
It's really, in my mind, insane that something that would be that effective in preventing relapse to heroin use would only be authorized for a period of 6 months.
There are other hurdles to getting clean. If you do have insurance coverage or even your own resources, getting into a program can take time. Funding cuts have forced some programs in the St. Louis region to close. Limited resources mean the ones that remain are swamped.
Right now, about 80% of our clients are heroin addicts.
Mike Morrison, CEO, Bridgeway Behavioral Health.
We have huge waiting lists.
Morrison sits in his office at Bridgeway's Arnold facility.
Just on this campus, we get about 100 to 150 calls a day. Our detox center in the city gets almost that many. We only have 16 beds.
To tell a person who is an addict, who has made the choice that they want to get themselves cleaned up, oh, well, we have space for you in about 60 days. You may as well tell them next year.
6 years ago, Reba Killingsworth started a long, hard journey with her daughter. The Killingsworths spent hours researching treatment options, spent thousands of dollars trying to get the best help, and then spent years watching their child relapse again and again. They first put Meredith in a local outpatient program.
4 days into it, she used.
At the time, Meredith was 17, about to turn 18. Her parents wanted to get her help before she was out on her own, so they sent her to an inpatient program out of state, one of the few that accepted teens.
We were fortunate enough to have saved money for her college, which we spent kind of in one big check for 30 days.
They've found there are no guarantees.
You know, you want to always say, I did my best. We did everything we could. But eventually it comes to the point of, we can't go broke over this. There isn't enough money in the world to keep an addict who does not want to get clean to make them clean up.
More of Meredith's story later in this series. She's still in trouble.
I don't think there's a parent out there that has a child that has been on a journey like this that at some point hasn't felt relief if they got locked up, because they knew they would live to see another day.
Other families don't have that assurance.
He died sitting in his truck in North City.
Average parents share unthinkable losses. Next time on Heroin Killing a New Generation. Megan Lynch, Newsradio 1120 KMOX.
This person's addiction will consume the entire family.
We noticed a change. There was something wrong.
He said, Mom, do you know what it's like to be an addict? I feel like I'm insane.
It's really kind of hopeless. That's awful to say, but it's hopeless for the heroin addict.
Parents who should have handsome young men at their sides instead cling to pictures.
That photo is laden with Carmen's tears from the funeral. She held that.
There are photos of chubby toddlers in diapers, of fresh-faced high school graduates, and of final moments.
This picture here actually is 3 hours before Andrew passed. We were at a party. He was with us.
Andrew Jones was 23. His last hours are still vivid for Mom Pam.
He woke us up and said, this was about 1:15 in the morning, said, you'd be proud of me. I took a cab home. I woke up at 3:30. Someone hit me in the head with a brick and said something's wrong. And so I found Andrew in the basement. He was actually in the bathroom and the door was locked and I had to break it down. And I knew then he had been gone for a while because he was very cold. Terry got up and went and did CPR and he was gone. If somebody said to us, Andrew's going to die of heroin, we'd say, no way. No way.
For Pam and Terry Jones, their son's death from a heroin overdose defies logic.
You know, you thought it happened in other areas that didn't touch you, didn't touch your kids, didn't touch your community.
I didn't know anything about heroin being around. You think that it's a 70s drug. You think it's a thing of the past.
They live in a lovely home in a winding St. Charles subdivision. Andrew was an honor roll student, won a college football scholarship.
His therapist said he was one of the most accomplished young men that he had ever met. He was a Boy Scout. He was an athlete. He was a hunter.
One summer break, they noticed problems. He was agitated, angry. His friends had changed. They confronted him, finding out a legitimate prescription for painkillers had turned into an illegal pain pill habit. That led to heroin. Andrew tried to get clean on his own, but within days, overdosed.
Bless his heart, he just said, what has happened to me? What have I become? I hate myself.
He tried other treatments, fought to stay away from heroin.
You know, he would probably go 3 to 4 weeks and be fine, and then somehow use again.
His parents took over his paychecks, keeping track of everything he spent. They could never relax.
When Andrew would go, I'd search his room. When I'd go, he probably searched mine for money, you know. It was just
constant looking for something. Constant.
They warned him time and again.
I'd tell him, Andrew, it's going to be jail or a body bag.
Terry and Pam say he fought it as hard as he could.
I am so proud of him. I will never ever be ashamed of him.
In Fenton, another family had to watch their son battle the same demon.
He said, Dad, it's as if a dark person is sitting next to you in the car, and they are constantly fighting for control of the steering wheel.
Tom Hurd recalls his son Michael's last day.
I believe he knew with certainty that morning that he was going to go use. He made a case, I just want to get out for a few minutes. I want to go to Quick Trip. I need some cigarettes. That's how he got the keys from us. He talked us into it. I'm sure he had ways of getting it in the suburbs, but for whatever reason, he, on a number of occasions, would go down into North City. He died sitting in his truck in North City on a beautiful afternoon, October the 1st.
Everyone called him Big Mike, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with a baby face, a young man with artistic talent and faith in God. Carmen Hurd's reaction to her son's overdose reveals the terrible toll the addiction had taken on everyone. She was out with their daughter when Tom called her cell.
I just looked at her and I said, it's over. And she said, Mom, it's over for all of us.
They say they put everything, their time, energy, finances, emotions, into freeing him. At the time, Tom was climbing the corporate ladder. He abandoned plans for advancement to devote himself to finding Michael treatment. The Hurds were stunned at the expense.
We spent $100,000 over the course of this time trying to help him.
Michael had great success at an out-of-state program. Counselors urged him to stay.
He didn't want to do that. He wanted to come home and see his Blues play and the Cardinals play.
Soon, his parents were afraid to let him leave the house at all. Carmen recalls watching him suffer every time he had a relapse.
Just showering, the water touching his skin was excruciating. All the violent shaking, nausea, sleeplessness, muscle aches.
Looking back, Tom and Carmen don't know how much more they could have done.
Through it all, you do think, should we have dove in more and tried to get more help? But after 3.5 years of it, you're just so spent.
If there's any good that came from our son's passing on this, his death on this, is that it gives us the strength and the means to speak out on it.
Are we losing the war on this drug?
They've got a very successful network, and it's very hard to put them out of business.
Hear more in the conclusion of heroin killing a new generation. Megan Lynch, Newsradio 1120 KMOX. Hours after a head-on collision, a young Shiloh, Illinois mom awoke in her hospital room asking about her 12-year-old daughter. April Sherrod was eventually told 6th grader Amari didn't make it. The 20-year-old driver of the SUV that swerved into their lane suspected of being high on heroin. As you've heard on KMOX, overdose deaths have spiked, yet many other lives are at stake.
Deaths involving heroin are not limited to overdosing, but also shootings and even some cases, shaken baby deaths.
A heroin addict loses control.
They begin to steal, they begin to bounce checks, they begin to sell drugs.
Their problem becomes yours.
Heroin users are responsible for many of the crimes you're hearing about in our communities today. How often have we been talking about car break-ins, copper thefts?
What's being done to stop it?
The story of the celebrity overdose overshadows a much larger issue.
Dozens of investigators recently packed a seminar in Edwardsville, Illinois, to learn how to trace heroin from its victims to the source. It followed an announcement by the U.S. Attorney that heroin deaths would be handled a new way by prosecutors.
We're going to treat every overdose as a potential homicide.
Stephen Wigginton says anyone who supplies heroin will be a suspected murderer.
And I don't have to prove that you're a major drug dealer. In fact, you could be a friend or a boyfriend or a girlfriend.
Some of those efforts are paying off. In St. Louis, a dealer was recently sentenced to 20 years in the federal pen. They tracked him back to the overdose death of a 22-year-old Mizzou student. What about choking off the supply before it gets to users? The officers on the front lines tell KMOX it's an unending battle.
So far this year, 46% of the drugs we have bought have been heroin.
Nearly half of all street busts, heroin. Lieutenant Chuck Boschert, Deputy Commander, St. Louis County Multi-Jurisdictional Drug Task Force.
Our guys that make undercover buys, we buy more heroin than marijuana or cocaine.
And Boschert says the suppliers are sophisticated.
They've got a very successful network, and it's very hard to put them out of business. As soon as you take one off, there's somebody else there to step up and take their place.
That's because the St. Louis region is on Mexican drug cartels' map. Harry Summers, Special Agent in Charge, DEA St. Louis.
Some of them will deal directly with organizational members that are here in St. Louis, and others will deal directly with organizational members that are in Chicago, and then you'll have a direct flow from Chicago down to this greater St. Louis area.
You heard him right. There are agents of Mexican drug cartels here in our community.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Yes.
Summers says they have many ways of sneaking heroin across the U.S. border all the way up here.
They may have it in cover loads of vegetables coming in, or you might find it in trap compartments that are built inside of cars.
Some people are convinced law enforcement can only do so much.
Last 35 years we've had this war on drugs. It's not working. And it's not going to work. We have an open society. There's no way you can stop all this from coming in.
You heard from Dan Duncan earlier in this series. He's worked in addiction prevention for 26 years. Duncan considers the current heroin epidemic the worst, most dangerous drug trend he's ever seen.
Our kids are our most precious commodity. They really are. They're the most important thing that we have. And I just think that we're doing them short shrift. I think that we're not doing a good job.
Duncan tells KMOX he's frustrated. He wants to see far more resources spent on prevention and education. He says what's needed is to cut off demand. St. Louis County Police Chief Tim Fitch was recently part of a call for more education in schools and communities. Fitch says most parents and kids have no idea that heroin is around.
They have fancy names for it, whether it be called horse or boy or smack or whatever it is they're being told. We honestly believe that some of these young people have no idea what they're putting into their system.
She tried China White, the snortable heroin, at a party, didn't know what it was curious.
Reba Killingsworth. In a previous report, we told you about her daughter Meredith, an honor student and athlete. Somewhere in high school, Meredith got her hands on heroin.
I knew that there were parents allowing kids to drink at their houses. It's frightening to me because most parents that do that are probably not aware that there are drugs there too, because they won't see them.
Meredith's life spiraled out of control, landing her in jail more than once.
There are things that she's seen and done that, we worked really hard to protect her from.
When Meredith's mugshot was first posted in the local paper, the Killingsworths broke their silence to try and give a face to the new heroin epidemic.
The first thing that I want people to know about my daughter is she is so much more than what she has become.
Parents willing to reveal their sorrow and loss. Addicts sharing how heroin took over their lives. Police telling horror stories, all with the hope it will stop a kid from trying heroin.
Trying it once, trying it twice, you're addicted, you're done.
By the time they realize that there's a problem, it's too late.
At first, it made me feel like Superman. Eventually, it became a handicap.
I lost family, I lost friends, I pawned everything you can think of.
It either leads to a life of ruin or no life at all.
KMOX will continue to follow this epidemic as heroin continues to kill a new generation. Megan Lynch, Newsradio 1120, KMOX.